Hi class, welcome to the last lesson of emotion and also our last online lesson. Mr. Watson and I are very much looking forward to having you guys back at school next week. And just a reminder to make sure that all your lessons are up to date, because we will have a very brief discussion about emotion, but we really do need to move on. So both of us are relying on the fact that you've completed all of these lessons and are up to date. So first of all, I thought I would let you see what some past TOK essays titles look like, which could be related to emotion. And your TOK essay is 2/3 of your assessment, and it's 66%, and it's a 1,600-word essay that you will complete in Year 12. So you're 2 years off. The Year 12s have just got their titles and are now working on them, so you're 2 years away, but just thought it's always good to know where we're kind of heading. Good. So today then what we're looking at we've looked at emotion as kind of like a bit standalone, and what I want to do today is really try and connect it to the areas of knowledge. So try and connect it to perhaps some subjects that you're studying in school, and also look at some real life situations. So as always, I want to start off with the journal entry for this week, and your journal entry is: can emotions play a positive role in guiding us towards effective methods for the production and acquisition of knowledge? And I'd like you to use 2 areas of knowledge to support your argument. So it's going to be a 500-word response, and what you're really answering there is whether emotions play a positive role in guiding you towards finding out knowledge, or perhaps even finding out about knowledge. And I want you to choose 2 areas of knowledge. And if you take notes, what I'd like you to do is take notes during this recorded session. Make sure you complete the activities. I've asked you to write 2 to 5 sentences for each activity, and it will help you to answer the journal entry by the end. And you can choose any 2 of the 5 areas of knowledge that we've looked at. So I thought we could start off with something a little bit funny. I think you might enjoy this. So what I'd like you to do, it is a YouTube clip about it's a it's pretty well known clip in England anyway. It's pretty funny. It's about a boy who turns 13, and as he turns 13 he becomes this kind of emotionally charged teenager, and it's really just trying to highlight that emotion can often be portrayed quite negatively, and perhaps is sometimes seen as something that's preserved really only for hormonal teenagers. But we're really going to be looking at how important emotions are actually when we're trying to find and if we want to sort of gain knowledge in certain areas. So it's only about 1.5 minutes, and it's just something for you to enjoy, just have a bit of a laugh over. So you can pause this and watch that, and then just come back. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to be looking now, thinking about science. So natural sciences is one of our areas of knowledge, and natural sciences is the study of the physical world, so nature, biology, chemistry, physics, all of those subjects that all of you will study at least one of. And the first thing to consider is that what we might see as the negative aspect of emotion is that a scientist may select results or may only see things when doing experiments which confirm their beliefs or support their desire to be right, and it'd be quite interesting at the moment with the coronavirus and all these scientists trying to find a vaccine, their desire to be considered the first scientist to find the vaccine and come through and save the day, that pride, that ambition, all of these are, like secondary emotions, which could lead to perhaps us not finding really what, the right vaccine, if it's going to be rushed through, will it be done properly? So these are things that perhaps could be a bit negative with the natural sciences. However, it can also be argued that there's a positive aspect to emotion in natural sciences, and that is the sense that scientists need that sort of drive and that motivation, and so maybe that ambition and that enthusiasm actually gives us an opportunity for some innovation to happen, for the more discoveries in science. And I do have another video clip for you to watch. Again, it's all on YouTube. Apologies to those of you who don't have access to YouTube. But what I'd like you to do is listen to the little video clip. She's a scientist, a German scientist. She speaks for about 10 minutes. It's not very long. And it's just really about, how does she explain the idea that emotions can complement logic in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. So what is it that she says? The three things that she says about emotions, or three types of emotions that actually really help in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. And she's not talking about emotion alone, she's talking about it complementing logic. And I'd just like you to write 3 sentences about that. So you can pause, watch that, and then write your sentences. Okay, so welcome back, and now we're moving on to another area of knowledge, which is maths. And again, there's sort of like a negative side of it, where people think that emotion might prevent us from pursuing knowledge, is the idea that, people actually do feel quite emotional about the subject of maths. And, if I was in the classroom now, I'd be asking you to put your hand up who didn't like maths, and or maybe if you really loved maths. And people have probably stronger emotions connected to maths as a subject than to any other subject. And very often this dislike or perhaps a disinterest in maths can be caused by perhaps a lack of self-confidence or perhaps anxiety, and that can actually stop people from going to find out, new knowledge, or perhaps, when I talk about pursuing, I'm talking about people finding out more to produce knowledge, or acquiring it. How many people want to go and find out more about maths? It might be that a certain fear that prevents you from doing that. And again, very, very much like the natural scientists, a positive aspect of emotion, again, is that determination, that ambition, enthusiasm, all of those emotions which may drive people to want to find out more about something. And I have actually got 2 videos for you to watch. One is it's less than 2 minutes, and it's just an educational person talking about, she's a lecturer at university when she lectures in education, and she talks about why often children and students of maths lack self-confidence and where that dislike of maths comes from. So it's just very brief. The next one's a really important video for you to watch. So Fermat's last theorem, we will talk about this again when we look at maths because it is so important. Fermat's last theorem was a math proof that people were trying to prove for about 400-500 years. And Andrew Wiles was somebody in the 90s who became almost obsessed to solve, prove Fermat's last theorem. So I'm not going to tell you too much more because you can watch it on this little video here. And it's only about 9 minutes long. But what I'd like you to do is just to write 2 to 3 sentences explaining how emotions can impact the pursuit of mathematical knowledge. And what's really important when you're writing an essay in TOK is that you include like personal experiences. So try and draw on examples from your own studies. So could you perhaps add a sentence there talking about, do you have a negative feeling towards maths or a positive feeling towards maths, and why that might be. So have a look at that video. It's really interesting, and come back to the recording when you've done that. Okay, and so now history. So the first thing I really want you to know, history, again, it's another area of knowledge for TOK, and we have to study it. And I know that I don't believe we do history. It's not one of our subjects that we do at Callum Vale, but it is an important one for us to learn for TOK. And again, we're just looking at historical knowledge, and we'll look at this in a lot more detail later down the track. So history then, the first thing you should know is that in IB history, in the course itself, they believe, or that the meaning, I can't think of the word now, they explain history, or the word the past is defined as anything that took place more than 10 years ago. So the definition of history is anything that happened more than 10 years ago. And something that's really important for you to know is that the history narrative is usually created to highlight where the historian feels empathy. So we see it from the viewpoint of the historian. I think it's important to say that without this sense of connection, without that empathetic connection, history could actually be reduced to dry accounts of the past. So we could actually say from this perspective that emotion does have an important role to play, because it would be very boring and perhaps people wouldn't be as interested to find out more. So that emotional bias, that personal perspective that the historian may bring, is a bit like your knowers profile. They will have their own biases and assumptions that they make, and based on things like gender and age. And so, we could say perhaps it's important to consider who the historian is who's written that, and what their perspective is. So when we read historical narratives, it's really important to understand that this is an interpretation of the past, rather than necessarily just a recount of what happened. So, and that historical events can be presented quite differently. And I've got a couple of, I've just got one example here of 2 very different ways that an event was presented. And that was in 1945, and I don't know if you've learned this or not, but in 1945, the Americans dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, and seemingly as a result of the dropping of those nuclear bombs, the Second World War came to a conclusion. It finished the Second World War. Of course, it did cause a lot of devastation. Hundreds, I think something like 130,000 people died initially, and then about 250,000 more people went on to die very slow, painful deaths, and the cities were decimated. But it did stop the Second World War and perhaps save millions of lives. So I've got there a couple of, so depending on which viewpoint you look at, then you could say that the nuclear bomb, saved millions of lives by ending World War II, or you might say it was an act of terrorism by the Americans. So two very, very different perspectives. And so I have got there a couple of, there's a little group of 6 short videos, all about, 5 minutes each, so 6 about 30 minutes. You don't have to watch all of them, but maybe just watch 1 or 2 of them. You may find them it's really interesting. Once you start watching them, you can't stop watching them. But the 6 short videos, very easily presented by the BBC on the history of this, the dropping of the nuclear bombs. It's quite interesting. And then there's also there just a short article that you can read about how the bombs are justified, so perhaps a more positive spin on it. And all I'd like you to do is just to write 4 to 5 sentences explaining how one specific historical event may have 2 different perspectives and how emotions may underpin this. Now, you can choose to use these nuclear bombs as an example, if you like, or you might want to find another historical event. It's completely up to you. I really don't mind, but just make sure it's more than 10 years ago. Okay, so human sciences as an area of knowledge is really looking at human behaviour. So it's human sciences isn't looking at your body, what the eyeball looks like or what the brain looks like. That would all fall under natural sciences. The human sciences is really about behaviour, and that could be, for example, psychology. Those of you who are doing psychology, you'll have lots of really cool information that you can incorporate. Business, but if you're studying business, again, falls under human sciences. So in politics, emotions run very, very high, and just a couple of keywords there. You've got the word nationalism, and you've also got the word propaganda, and we see a lot of that in politics. And so just as an example here, I've got some photos on the right-hand side from 9/11, and I believe that most of you will know about 9/11. So 9/11 was when 2 aeroplanes crashed into the side of the Twin Towers, which was in the central business district in New York, and these 2 buildings collapsed, and it killed, I think it was about 4,500 people within a very short time. And, the whole world was stunned, pretty devastating. But what did happen was that it really did evoke some very, very strong feelings of patriotism, but also some very strong feelings of nationalism. And there is a bit of a difference. So nationalism is when you have this such extreme pride in your country that you believe your country is better than everybody else's, and you seek to dominate other countries because you believe you are in charge. And then the same thing with patriotism is a love of your country, but it's not about that you want to then, overthrow every other country. So as a result of 9/11, this had this very strong nationalism, and we saw that through, these American flags were flying everywhere. People were becoming, very proud to be American, which then, as I said, that patriotism, there's no problem with patriotism, but it can become an issue when decisions were then made by politicians to invade Iraq, and that's where we found ourselves back in another war in the Middle East. Also, you might see the use of propaganda, and I thought this was quite an interesting advert here. Bit of propaganda there about you've got these frontline workers. Obviously, this is during the coronavirus, and they're trying to really get across the message they want people to stay at home. And the whole style of this advert actually is done in the style of, from the First World War and the Second World War. If you look at some of the propaganda posters there, where you've got, your country needs you, and you've got someone pointing at, saying, go on, out you go and sign up. So, this kind of evokes that kind of emotion about doing something for your country. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. And again, it's really about appealing to emotions. While we're talking about appealing to emotions, advertising also falls under human sciences, and and that's because when we are making decisions about buying something, it often comes from our emotions, or perhaps our intuition. If we're trying to decide what car to buy, we might choose to buy, if we have the money, a sort of German brand, Mercedes, because it makes us feel successful and powerful. So these are like emotions that we may seek. Advertisers appeal to our emotions, and they do that perhaps by knocking off 1 cent to make us feel, oh, we've got a good deal, and make us feel that we're not spending so much money, and so it makes us feel happy that we've saved money. The other thing that they often do in advertising to appeal to our emotions is that the use of celebrities, and you will have seen that with the Uber Eats adverts. Here we've got Sophie Monk saying what she will be eating tonight. So, trusted sports people, the subliminal messages, product placement, and certainly product placement was huge in the 1990s. I remember as a teenager about your age growing up. Actually, I was a teenager in the 80s, but again, really in the 90s, in my early 20s, it was very prevalent, the product placement. You'd be watching a movie and you'd suddenly zone in on a can of Coca-Cola that somebody was drinking. And again, it's about having that emotional connection. I really like that particular actor, and I want to feel that I am like that person. And again, it's all about it's about assisting your emotions as much as it is about appealing to your emotions. So all you have to do is here, you're just taking a few notes for here. You don't have to do anything just yet. Okay, and then we have the arts, and the arts is probably the area of knowledge that people link most quickly and closely to emotion. And that's because people often see art as the language of emotion, and it's about how an artist communicates their emotion. It's really important for you to understand that in art is usually considered in TOK as something that's intended, and that there is a message or an emotion that the artist is trying to communicate with their audience. And there's a lot of discussion when we look at art as an area of knowledge. We'll talk about things like, whose responsibility is it to understand the message? Is it the artist's responsibility, or is it the viewer of the art? Arts can include, of course, music, dance, film, literature, reading, as well as painting and sculptures. So here it's really important to understand the context and personal circumstances of the artist, sometimes to interpret the message, to understand, when the piece of art was made, and perhaps where that person was located. So we've got 3 artists here featured on this slide. We've got Bernini, who created this sculpture of the damned soul. We've got Max Beckmann, 1918 to 1919, which was the end of the First World War, which may give you some hints on sort of message that he's giving there. And then there's also a quote there from Mark Rothko, who is a modern artist. And you might want to have a look at some of his artwork. His are quite interesting as well. So all I'd like you to do, just look up any of these three artists, just one of them's fine. Just see if you can choose one of their artwork, either one that's featured or one that's not featured on this slide, and just want you to write 3 to 4 sentences explaining what message or emotion you think that they're trying to express and why. And you do need to have a little bit of an idea of a bit behind them, like who they are, where they lived, what was happening at that era. So it might take a little bit of research just to find out. Okay then, so just to wrap up, the key ideas for the unit on emotion. Remember that it's very hard to define emotion and to say where emotion ends. Remember also that we sometimes say that it's something that stands quite separate from reasoning or from knowledge, but it's important for us to understand that it's actually interconnected. Also, remember that emotion's subjective, so just like sense perception, we can never really be sure how somebody else is feeling about something, and it can actually be quite difficult to communicate our true emotions to somebody else. Something else that often happens is that we have this kind of natural urge to trust our own emotions and sort of believe our emotions, perhaps above our ability to logic and to reason, perhaps. And the other thing that we talked about was that it was, emotion is actually essential in the pursuit of knowledge, although it is often seen as something quite negative. We also have to remember it's impossible to cut emotion out of decision making. Excuse me. And also that our emotions are shaped by these external factors. So, past experiences, gender, location. And again, this is very much based around our knowers profile, that knower things that were the elements of the knowers profile that we looked at the very beginning of the year. Also, that art is used to share those emotions and messages of an artist, and that also producers of knowledge can manipulate those claims to try and appeal or assist with our emotions. So they're like your key ideas to emotion that you need to keep bearing in mind. So, journal entry. Please make sure that you get the journal entry done. You've been given now 4 entry possibilities, and you have to submit at least 3 of those by the end of week 5. So that's actually this week. So this is your assessment for TOK. So please make sure you've got your 3 journal entries. There's 3 out of 4 possible ones completed by the end of this week. And we look forward to seeing you on Monday. We'll do a quick review of emotion on Monday, and we'll be then moving into reason. So we're very much looking forward to seeing you. Take care, guys. Bye.